we're so grateful to be here at the Indiana State Museum today. This was such perfect timing for our season, and we're grateful that Gail Brown, who is the archaeologist specialist with the State Museum, and Rebecca Swanson, who's been running around all day. She's the gallery program manager with the State Museum. When Chris mentioned how it's different every time you come, I'm sure that has a lot to do with the work that Rebecca is doing as the gallery program manager. So thank you for partnering with us. Thank you for inviting us here to this beautiful space. And then I just want to say, every season, First LEGO League teams are given a new challenge. And this year's is centered around the wonders of archaeology. So we're very excited to be with all of you today. You're our experts, and speaking to experts is a really important part of the First LEGO League team experience. And we hope that our conversation with you today will spark some ideas in our teams and really inspire them to think like scientists as you develop your innovation projects. So we have a few questions, and I'm going to lead. I'm Lori Langley. I'm the statewide volunteer coordinator for FIRST Indiana Robotics. It's not just First LEGO League, it's all of our programs. We have middle school and high school programs. And my daughter is an alum. She was in First LEGO League since she was 9 years old until she graduated out of the program at 14, almost 15, and then went on to do First Robotics competition, which we really hope all of you First LEGO Leaguers will want to, at 14, go to the next program, whether that's First Tech Challenge or First Robotics competition. So that's our goal. Our fingers are crossed that you'll stick with us all the way through high school. So welcome. Thank you for staying the extra hour with us if you can, and I'll throw it to Devin.
Yes. Hello, everybody. We would love to start by just having all of you introduce yourselves and tell us briefly about how you are involved in the field of archaeology.
Both of them?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Martha Buchert. I'm what's known as a cultural resource manager for the Indiana Army National Guard, which essentially just means that I'm responsible for all the archaeological sites and the historic buildings under the purview of National Guard, so either on their lands or buildings that they work in / out of.
You need them both?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize we were two-fisting. Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Jeremy Wilson. I'm a professor at Indiana University and a bioarchaeologist by training, which means that I analyze human skeletal remains from archaeological sites. We have an active ongoing project downtown Indianapolis where we're trying to recover the forgotten members of the community in the Green Lawn Cemetery. And so we'll be wrapping up field work here in a few weeks, but the lab work will continue on for quite a while.
Hi, I'm Gail Brown. I'm the archaeology specialist here for the Indiana State Museum. My role isn't necessarily excavating. Our role here at the museum is to preserve all the material the rest of these folks here excavate for eternity, and to make sure that they're accessible for research and for others to explore and learn from. So here at the museum, we have roughly collections from 9,000 archaeology sites from throughout the state of Indiana. So we have collections from every single county, and it represents the entire timeline of human history here in Indiana, from roughly 12,000 years ago, all the way up through a couple of little green army men that I have from the 1960s. So we have roughly 3.5 million objects as part of our collection. So it's my role is to make sure that they are well taken care of and that we can use them on exhibits and for programs like we did today.
And he does a great job.
Hi, I'm Chris Schmidt. I'm at the University of Indianapolis. I'm also a bioarchaeologist, which means I focus on the study of human remains. I started my career working primarily with populations from Indiana, and I've studied humans from this state as old as several thousand years old up to just a few days old. So I've had a lot of experience in that regard here. These days, however, most of my work focuses on people in Italy and understanding the lives of folks who lived around Mount Vesuvius when it erupted and buried people. I've been helping colleagues over there learn more about those folks.
I'm Professor Charles Beaker from Indiana University Bloomington. I'm an underwater archaeologist. I direct the Center for Underwater Science at Indiana University. My research is really working on protection of underwater cultural heritage sites, creating underwater parks, state of Florida, 3 state parks, 4 in California. Recently, we've made 2 underwater shipwreck parks here in the state of Indiana and Lake Michigan. And I also work as a Caribbean archaeologist on indigenous sites, the Taino, that we like to say the people that greeted Columbus when he arrived in the Caribbean, wasn't discovered by Columbus. And so really protecting these sites for future generations is what I'm involved in.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lynn Kavapal. I'm a professor at Butler University, and I do archaeology in Greece, mostly in prehistoric Greece. And I dig at sites with burials, so I dig at cemeteries, but also at settlements and houses. And I'm also a pottery specialist, a ceramicist. And I think about the ways that potters see pots differently than people who are going to use a pot see pots. So it's a little bit of what we would call cognitive archaeology.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jude Hastings. I'm actually an undergrad student at Butler University, and I've been an intern now with the Butler Archaeology Lab with Dr. Kavapal for a semester. And just this past summer, I went to a field school and got trained in cultural resource management. So far, I primarily worked with pre-contact Native American archaeology.
All right, wonderful. So we've heard from all of you. At this point, kind of moving forward in our conversation, if a question speaks to you and is relevant to what your interests are, feel free to answer. We don't need to, if it's not your thing, then we'll just move down the list. So we'd love to hear from you. Our first Lego League teams have kind of seen part of the challenge is kind of discovering the past to uncover the future, kind of to see how the past is related to the future. So I'm going to start with just a basic question. Why do people study old places and objects? What do you hope to learn?
I'll take a stab at it. For me, there's a couple things I would say. My take on archaeology is one, I hope this is a good way to start. I don't feel like we discover anything. We recover things, but we don't discover people. We're all just people. And the people who lived in the past are very much like the people of today. And so when I'm studying people of the past, what I'm really interested in is understanding human variation and seeing not just all the cool groups of today, and there are lots of cool groups today, but that coolness of humanity goes back tens, hundreds of thousands of years. And so as an archaeologist, I'm hopefully myself, but also bringing to others stories about all of the human groups that I've got time in my life to address and to help bring about voices, bring about discussion, and to help us all appreciate just the vastness of who we are.
Yeah, I guess kind of speaking to that a little bit, kind of a very similar idea is the reason, I got interested in archaeology was that connection with the past, because I think it's very natural to have questions about where we came from, whether you're speaking, as an individual, where did I come from, looking at your parents, grandparents, etc. Or if you're kind of extrapolating that and looking more at humanity as a whole, where did we come from? But I think it's, in terms of archaeology, we like to say that we deal with a lot with material culture, which essentially just means the things that people left behind. And in some cases, it can be very special, when you are the first person in a very long time to hold a piece of pottery. Or I don't know if this has happened to you, but sometimes you see very personal marks left on these materials. So like, I know I found a brick where you could still see the thumb mark of the individual that made it. So in many ways, it's kind of the personal connection that you can make with somebody in the past, although you guys never actually met in any physical sense.
It's really special.
Just to think about putting your hand someplace. So when I study a pot, sometimes I can see finger marks. So I get to put my hands where those hands were. And there's a lot of life that we live that we interact with objects, we interact with things, and those things survive past when the experience does. So we get to imagine what the experiences of people were without being able to access the people as they were experiencing those moments. But we do have the things. So we get to try to kind of imagine what that was like and recreate those worlds, rediscover those worlds and their experiences. And that's a really cool idea. And it also, there's a lot of opportunity there because, we're recreating and rethinking about the way lots and lots of people would have experienced these same objects in different ways. So it's just a lot of fun. It's like a creative playground in a lot of ways with some boundaries, but really, really interesting and always kind of inspirational.
That's really cool. All right, Deb.
Yes, well, thank you for sharing. As I know you may have heard a little bit throughout the day, our First Lego League teams have been challenged with the task of identifying and researching a problem faced by archaeologists. Once they do, they need to, of course, work together with their teammates to propose a solution that could help in some way. So we would love to spend a little bit of time asking you about the challenges you face when working in the field or conducting research anywhere along the way. So I'll let you ask the next question.
So this might be especially related to what Martha and Lynn just shared. How do archaeologists unearth something fragile without damaging it?
So you work slowly, very carefully, and you start from far away. And you kind of dig a perimeter, and you dig down lower than you think you're going to need to go, and you kind of work. So first you start outside and down, and then you kind of work down and kind of around. And with small, like increasingly small tools, depending on what it is, right, and where you are. Now, if you're in a situation where it's people, you're going to have to do other things. So I'm thinking about digging a pot out of the ground. Like first you take layers always, right, around. You never try to dig a hole, but when you have something that you need to preserve, sometimes you have to work around it a little ways. So very carefully, very small tools, sometimes soft tools. So maybe not a dental tool, but something like a wooden stick or something, to be very, very careful.
Just from my experience working on Civil War battlefield sites, sometimes we would encounter soldiers' knapsacks that have been buried in the ground for 150 years. And for us, you're starting off with using shovels and those sorts of things. And when you get down to the actual object that you're trying to recover, we would actually switch to toothpicks. Mm-hmm. And it's just a slow, meticulous process of slowly uncovering that object. And one experience that I had when we were uncovering one of these things, and it's 130 degrees, and we're sitting in this bottom of this trench, there was a backhoe parked not too far away from us, and a little visitor on the site asked, "Why aren't you using that?" And we're like, "Yeah, why aren't we using that? That would be much cooler." But no, it's taking your time and using some of the smallest tools that you ever thought you'd ever be using before.
In some ways, it's kind of less about the excavation of some very fragile materials, but I know kind of one tool that is getting increasingly used for preservation of materials in what archaeologists like to call in situ, which essentially just means in place, in order to document what those materials may have looked like in situ before we even start the process of excavation. You know, for a long time, it was taking very good photos. With newer technologies, one of the things that I've seen growing in the CRM field is using photogrammetry to take a very good and essentially make a 3D model of what the object or possibly human remains, what have you, looked like in the ground before you even started excavation. So that we always try to be very careful, but in the circumstance that you do make a little whoopsie, at least you kind of have a documentation of what it looked like before and what it looked like, complete or as complete as archaeological material can be.
So then future scientists are really using that rather than the actual artifact when they're kind of studying it and manipulating it, would you say?
It's a combination because the photogrammetry can be very, very good, especially for purposes of documentation. But there's certain times where you need to work with the actual material and study the actual material that you're working with. So it's just case by case, depending on what your question is and what your research is.
So Devon's next question is kind of related to that.
Yes, so kind of the next step. So once you rediscover something special on a site, what is the process like? How difficult is it to keep that artifact or remains or whatever it may be safe for years to come?
Preservation.
Yeah, this is
I was going to say, that is my job.
It sounded like it.
So when the material is excavated from the field, it usually comes into the museum, and we have a bunch of standards and processes that have to be followed for that material to come in. But like our role here at the museum is that we have to keep that material stable for however long, because it has to be available for researchers to come in to use. We have to be able to use that, in exhibits and those sorts of things. And sometimes those objects just can't really be used. I mean, somebody could come in and look at them through research, but we would never be able to put those on display because they're just so fragile. So if you think of just like even just take the things that you have on you today that an archaeologist in the future may find, like your clothing and those sorts of things. Imagine that they've been buried in the ground for a really long time and what conditions they would be in. We have to monitor air temperature, humidity, light levels, vibrations. We have to keep in mind every time we open up a drawer or close a drawer, that impacts a particular object. We also have to be ready for such things if an earthquake would happen to hit this building at any given time. How will our collections be safe from that? So it's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of working with chemists and other conservators, thinking about how to best treat something, how to maybe we add preservatives or not add preservatives to certain objects. So there's a lot of science to go on to preserving these objects for future generations.
So keeping in mind that our First Lego League teams are trying to identify a problem that they can focus on, let's talk about challenges that arise when working in extreme environments. So thinking like deserts, frozen ground, underwater. What are some of those challenges?
So we've been on the cemetery project downtown Indy since last November. And if you remember, let's say January, we were working in those sub-zero temperatures. And so what I'm thinking about right now is a way to protect not just archaeological deposits, but our archaeologists. So, where can technology come into play to keep our dig teams warm, but also allow the sunlight to still get in during those shortened days in the winter? And then, of course, the inverse of that in the summer is how do we protect our teams from the extreme heat and humidity, of course, the torrential downpours that we get. One thing, Charlie has an exception to this, but when it rains on a terrestrial excavation, that rain goes exactly where you want to go, which means downhill. And so flooding is a constant problem, and imagine this in a cemetery context like what we're doing right now. So I look to you for answers.
Well, other than your rain, I guess we work in the most different underwater environment. So as an underwater archaeologist, we have to start by being comfortable diving. We work hard at the university to train people to dive. I consider the use of scuba just a tool to get to work. No different than driving my car to work. I happen to teach students how to use a scuba tank to get to work. And then underwater, you can imagine all the environmental concerns from depth concern to the gases you're breathing for decompression concerns or narcotic effects. You can imagine the temperature of the waters. This summer we're working in Caribbean waters, crystal clear waters, but then we got wave action. We got concerns about impending hurricanes or storms might be coming in. How big a wave can you go out and safely dive and get in and out of a dive boat? We're also working in cold water environments. We have shipwrecks here in the Great Lakes, which are pretty much cold year round. So we have hypothermia concerns to work with. And, when we think about also black water, this summer we were working with the State Museum on a mammoth site in a pond here near South Bend, Indiana. Total black water. Now, it's not deep. It's 4 feet to holes we were digging down to 13 feet. It's our deepest hole, but it's entirely braille. Trying to feel your way to work on the site, plus having dredges that are bringing material up and screenings on the surface in case you happen to bring up those objects. Backing up to some of the technology, you mentioned photogrammetric modeling. If I look at this room here and make this into a shipwreck with all the chairs and everything turning into the wood parts of the ship, in the old days, we would come in here with tape measures and trying to set some datum point and measure and spend hours underwater. But I'll tell you that in 2014, our university got started with photogrammetric modeling. It's one of the first universities in the U.S., where instead we could swim in this room that were filled with water and literally take 2,000 to 3,000 pictures of all these chairs, everybody sitting inside of it, and do that within an hour dive, take it back to the laboratory, process that photogrammetric model, make site plans from it, and also do monitoring of sites. So we talk about in situ preservation. So at any rate, I guess my biggest concern is safety underwater, having enough air and making sure that we're safe and the objects are safe.
One more question. Comment.
So right now I work at Camp Atterbury, and I don't know if any of y'all been down that way or been on base, but with Camp Atterbury previously been primarily farmland. It is an invasive plants paradise. So moving through Camp Atterbury will shred you up pretty bad if you don't bring any sort of vegetation management tools, loppers, machetes, things like that. So getting through dense vegetation, certainly, at least in my current work, is a very big problem. The other one that I've experienced a lot of is before I worked with the Indiana National Guard, I worked on national forests a lot, and especially in what were called wilderness areas on national forests. Those are areas that they essentially keep untouched by man. So there's no roads into those areas of the forests. There's very few trails. Essentially, if you wanted to do archaeology in that area of the forest, you had to pack everything in, including sometimes having to pack on donkeys to get in there. So sometimes just the rurality, if you will, of the sites that we're trying to get to can cause significant issues when you are trying to pack in, especially heavy equipment, which some of the new technologies can be still very heavy equipment. So
We want to talk more about the technology in a moment, but Devin's question.
Yeah, kind of just, playing off maybe a few of the comments you all made. What are some big safety concerns for archaeologists in the field? I know you touched on it a little bit, but just if there are any other concerns.
A concern I try to be aware of is the weather. So we talked a little bit about rain, but a lot of times when you're digging an archaeological site, you're sort of out in the open. And you guys know what tornadoes are? What's a tornado? What makes a tornado bad? Yeah, go ahead. You are so correct. So it can damage houses and buildings. So you can imagine what it does to like 6 archaeologists standing out in a field. And while we were not hit by a tornado, I have been in the field where funnels have formed, and what's even worse is lightning. And so one thing you have to be aware of while you're out there working is avoiding things like tornadoes and lightning. Just a little safety tip.
Something that I'm always concerned about are insects, ticks, mosquitoes, spiders. They all carry different kinds of diseases that we all have to worry about. So I know probably all of us up here, except for maybe Charlie, you probably wear shark repellent, but the rest of us probably cover ourselves in DEET product like there's no tomorrow. So I mean, insects and kind of wildlife is something we're always concerned about.
Piggybacking kind of off the wildlife comment, depending on where you're working, like you might not get a whole ton of wildlife in Diamond Chain, Indianapolis, but I've worked in places like Montana where you have to be concerned about both black and grizzly bears. So when I worked in Montana, I always carried bear spray with me. And again, depending upon where you're working in the US, you might have to be very aware of the different wildlife you might encounter.
Any other crazy challenges that you think would surprise our teams before we move on?
I think the most simplest one, having supervised really large field crews, is water. And I don't mean water in the way of rainfall, is making sure, how do we know technologically that our field crews are hydrated enough? Because we oftentimes dig in the summer, and similar to, say, landscapers or other outdoor professionals, so I pose to you all yet again, how can we monitor hydration and understand when people are incidentally putting themselves at risk?
So I have two that are very different. So I'll start with the one that kind of works with what Jeremy said, and that is working in the sun, sunburn. So not just putting on sunscreen, but reapplying very regularly, because you can not just damage your skin long term, but you can have serious illness like sunstroke or something like that if you're not taking care to wear a hat. Like I've got my hat on today. This is my field hat. It's good, except that it doesn't cover my ears, so I have to make sure I have sunscreen on my ears. So those are things like, we work in Greece, you often don't have shade. And so we have to carry our water into every place that's rural. We have to make sure before you leave, everyone's got water, everyone's got sunscreen, everyone who needs to be covered is covered, and ideally you have a hat. Our animals tend to be sort of like in the ground, right? So if we're excavating, we're digging through their habitat. So we have to worry about snakes. Sometimes they're friendly, sometimes they're not. We try to not kill them because we want to be kind to what's naturally there. We have burrowing spiders and scorpions and things like that. So all of those things. But the other thing that we've had at some of the places where I've worked are thinking about other people who are very interested in what we're doing for reasons that aren't related to archaeology, but more related to kind of selling antiquities that they might find. So we have had to guard sites because they are actively being robbed while we're working there. And part of why we work there is to keep that, to kind of keep that at bay. So if archaeologists are working, people are less likely to be digging their own holes around some of these archaeological sites. So in that way, archaeology, even though excavation can be and is by nature destructive, it can also serve to preserve cultural heritage in those kinds of instances. So we have to worry about other people around.
So teams, remember all of these problems that you're hearing, even if they, it becomes an insect issue or a snake issue, that doesn't sound like it's related to archaeology. You weave your solution back into the topic of archaeology, because remember, your goal is to help an archaeologist do what they do, so that you can go in any direction you want as long as you are helping an archaeologist in the field. So keep all of these great issues that they're describing in mind. So our FIRST robotics teams across all three of our programs are very interested in technology. You've already mentioned it a few times. So we have a few questions about the field of archaeology and how that has changed in recent years, especially due to innovation and technology. Devin?
So I like my mom said, you all have mentioned different types of technology, but are there drones, robots, AI, just different, forms of technology already being used? And if so, what are your thoughts about the new kind of technology that's being incorporated into your field?
Well, as I previously mentioned, all the concerns about underwater archaeology, technology such as the photogrammetric modeling, which I described, enables us to do a dive in an hour, which might have taken us multiple days to map a site. Also can be used for monitoring purposes. So we're talking about photographic imaging, which can be done with a simple GoPro camera in shallow waters carried by a diver. Then you have deeper sites. So things like remote operated vehicles, where the camera can go where the diver may not go safely, is important to us. Certainly the advances in technology have enabled us to do a lot of deep water discoveries that were not available a few years ago. So scuba is limited really safety to the top, let's say 300 feet or less. And really 133 feet or less is what's accepted. The deep water areas are concerns, but then also there are, I can think of in Mexico, cenote sites that we are not working there, but Dominican Republic is an area we call them manantial. So we could take this room, fill it full of water, cut a hole in the ceiling where karst topography, like here in Indiana, has eroded, and this breakdown is filled with an aquifer full of water. And some of these sites are then used as sites for ceremonial offering, where we can see that were used for over 2,000 years. And yet the diver might have to rappel down to the water level, get in the water, drop down. One of our sites is another 130 to 240 feet deep. So the physical concerns for the diver can be eliminated with robotics and operated vehicles or drop cameras, as simple as a camera turned onto a timer on a rope, drop down to look around, bring it up and look at it later. These are all things that we've started to use, but the technology of the 21st century for underwater has really made our work a lot simpler, and it's imperative that we work with that new 21st century technology.
No, point was Chair.
Oh, who? Me? Oh, sure. I can talk. You can always talk. Literally paid to talk. So I would say visualizing what is beneath the ground surface in terrestrial archaeology has changed in the past 20 years and will continue to change. So whether it's measuring through technology the magnetic properties of soils, because when you heat them, the polarity of the soil changes. Or you might envision shooting radar down into the ground. It kind of looks like a golf cart that you use to find utility lines. So that ground penetrating radar is another form of technology. And nowadays, we're even mounting these remote sensing techniques to drones and flying them over larger fields that would have taken archaeologists pushing that lawnmower days to complete. And the drones are doing it for us in much less time. So it's exciting to be. Yes, it's expensive. The equipment is, but it's an exciting time to be in archaeology and imagine large landscapes now being visualized for what you can't see on the ground surface, but is below it.
Kind of to that same point, I know drones are being used a lot more also for monitoring archaeological sites, both, just in rural areas where it's difficult to get terrestrial access, but In my work with the National Forest Service, I helped out with wildfires actually. And when you're dealing with a wildfire, obviously your primary concern is threats to life, limb, and home. But one of the other concerns is the resources in the area, including the archaeological resources. So I know that we would at times, if the fire was too hot, or even if things were actively burning in the area, use drones to fly over the archaeological sites and just try to see what state they're in at the time. Or again, like if the fire just passed through, but it's still too hot to get in there, see what damage was done so we can start making a plan and prepping ourselves to go in there and recover what we can recover and preserve what we can.
From the kind of the artifact preservation realm, 3D scanning and 3D printing has become like really great tool for us, because if we do have some of those objects that are really fragile and just can't take a lot of handling or being handled or put on display, we can most of the time take a 3D copy of those objects and produce them either through a 3D printer or some sort of device such as that.
So similar to that, I think it might be related. What improvements have been made in the way you organize and keep track of all of the artifacts that you discover over time? I'm sure it's a vast amount of discoveries.
I'm going to kind of do a combination there. Previously, I've talked about more or less visual documentation, but going into the technology for underwater, we use side scan sonars. We use sonar systems for penetrating into the bottom sediments. And then we also use magnetometers, which show magnetic changes. So it's a little different technique. And that's enabled us to see sites that we can't even excavate on yet, or may not want to excavate on. And then as far as tracking, we of course tie the computer system with the side scan sonar into a magnetometer simultaneously with global positioning system. And even to the effect that if we have a boat moving forward, we just did this with the State Museum a month ago on this mammoth site. You've got a boat moving, you got the sensor that's behind the boat, let's say 10 feet or 3 meters. You've got to tie that into the computer so the positioning system knows where the unit is versus where the boat is, and puts the two together with the software so that you can very accurately say, okay, put a buoy right here. This is where we know we have an anomaly, we call it. So electronic survey is really vastly improved for underwater work. But then I've also then described the visual documentation, which is also greatly improved.
I can tell you, like, each archaeologist probably does it a little bit differently, but like in terms of when you're recovering the data and the material from your sites, you have to keep meticulous maps. And so a lot of that, most of us, when we were trained, it was all hand-drawn maps on graph paper. But anymore now with GIS technology, most people can do that just using global positioning satellites and be able to map things pretty quickly. But then as those objects come out, what's really important for all of us is that we remember the context or the provenience from where those objects are from. So once we excavate a site, it's destroyed. And so the only thing that is left is the records that we keep from when we're in the field. So it's all those maps, it's all of our notes, and we have to keep that material or that information with those objects. So when those objects come into a place like the museum, we get all of the maps, all the notes, and so we could technically rebuild that site from all that information and know exactly where in the world that particular object came from. And I would say, and you can all correct me, but I think the bane of most archaeologists as we're coming up is numbering our artifacts. Each artifact gets a catalog number, and that helps us track it throughout the rest of its life. And so that number has to be put on that object. And if you talk to any of my interns right now, they can tell you that they put on numbers on thousands of objects every day, just so we can kind of keep track of that. Now, there's some new technologies such as QR codes that we can start applying to some objects. but not all objects are big enough to take a QR code. So that is something kind of moving forward in the future. How can we better kind of keep track of those objects and their locations and all the data that comes with them?
Next two questions are kind of closely related. So Devin, the first.
Yeah, do any of you have a favorite tool, old or new, that you would not want to live without? And if so, what makes that so useful or special to you in the field or while preserving?
GPS. I feel like this is kind of bad for an archaeologist, but I truthfully have a terrible sense of direction. So I probably could not get to any site, let alone relocate it, let alone, individually hand draw each little artifact we find on a map if it wasn't for GPS and various GPS devices and programs like ArcGIS.
My favorite field tool is a lot simpler than that. It is a modified chopstick. Well, the ones I have are probably not very authentic. This is made out of wood. And then it's sharpened on one end and flattened on the other. And by being made out of wood, it's soft when working around human remains. So I can use the pointed end to sort of get into little nooks and crannies, use the flat side to sort of push things away. On TV, they always show archaeologists using brushes. You don't excavate with a brush, just so you know. And so you kind of move the sediment with the little stick, and then you turn the other side, and they're talking about, being slow, and that's what you use to kind of expose bone. And that's my favorite tool. We call them Simpsons, if you want to know.
You mentioned a stick earlier, and I wondered why not a soft brush, but you really don't use the brushes?
You don't excavate with a brush.
We did at the Children's Museum, I remember.
And actually, the weird thing with the brushes is that it can actually inadvertently start to compact the dirt.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, that's good information, teams.
So first I'm going to say that we used to have a stick that we would sharpen with a pencil sharpener, like for our bioarc would use that because we had run through all our other stuff and she was like, this sharpened stick is the best. But so as someone who's also a field archaeologist, sometimes digging not where there's like maybe you don't have any artifacts or material culture, but you're looking for soil changes. That's when I want a broom. I want a broom with sort of like this. There's a sweet spot of soft bristles and like sturdier bristles so that you can see when soil changes. So you might dig for a little while, but then you have to sweep really carefully to see if you have a stratigraphic change. And that's going to tell you something about the history of what you're looking at, because either something has changed naturally to, change the nature of what you're digging in. Like maybe it's something that's sandier, maybe it's something that had plants in it, so it's loamier and darker in color. And then maybe within that, you start to see a human-made pit. But you can't see that if you can't make the dirt clean. So we spend a lot of time sweeping. And if you don't have a good broom, it's impossible. You just make more dirt instead of making a clean surface.
For me, it's very simple. The development of tear-proof Duracopy underwater paper. If you go underwater, and I tell my students, if you go down and look at something and make the measurements and do all the things and write it down on your diver's slate that you come up with then and then erase all the material, it's gone. So I literally have years of plastic paper we take underwater on clipboards, put your name on it, put the date on it, put the location on it, take your notes on it, bring it up, wash it off, put it in a file folder. So we still have that data. And I'll tell you, in the early days, we didn't have that available to us. So the best tools we have is a camera to take a picture and paper to write your notes on. If you come up with no picture and no notes on a piece of paper, as far as I'm concerned, you just wasted the time underwater.
Mm-hmm. So remember, teams, your solution is you could come up with something brand new, but you could also come up with a modification of something that already exists, which it sounds like they do in the field regularly when they modify tools and sharpen things with pencil sharpeners. I know we're running out of time. We have a couple more questions that I think are really important to us in the FIRST robotics world, and I really get the sense that it's important to you as archaeologists. So
Yeah, I mean, my favorite thing about my experience in First LEGO League is that we focus, not only on exploring big ideas and solving problems, but also on learning how to respect people and cultures. And as, Mom said, I think seems very similar in your all fields where honoring the communities and the histories connected to your discoveries or rediscoveries is just as important as the science itself. So we just have a couple questions about that.
yeah, so can you tell us about how the steps what the steps are that you try to take to ensure that the people and the cultures and the places that you study are respected and that you are not doing any harm to these, what may be very sacred and historical places?
Obviously, there are sensitivities around human skeletal remains that some people have. And so in the lead up to this project here in downtown Indianapolis, I was adamant that the city create a community advisory group that oversees all the work done in the field in the lab. But to take it to your question, really, where I learned the importance of this is that for the past 5 years, I've been working in Oklahoma on the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre investigation. And so there, as well as now here, we have community oversight, and we're largely doing archaeology for that community. So it's about approaching and meeting their understanding and meeting their needs as much as it might be about your own research interest. Because, science for science sake is good, but science that also benefits the community is important too.
Yeah, that's a great example, and one that we did here locally, known as the Grave in the Road. It was a grave in Johnson County, and it was in the middle of the road. And there are descendants of the person thought to be in that grave, and so we worked with the family, the existing family, to the extent that they came out to the site every day. They provided oral histories. They took pictures, brought coffee, and what I think Jeremy and I are both getting at is that there's a sense of service in that there is you're working with a community that has a question, and we need to make it clear that is our goal as well, to work with this community. And so working with these descendants and doing this excavation, it was really wonderful for me, and it was actually hard for it to end. Like, there were tears and hugs when it was all over. So that's, I think, very important, and having that relationship with the community is just, it's really a wonderful feeling.
And I think part of it is also kind of making sure that you kind of always give back to those communities that you were working in. So always kind of keeping track of like what's changing or what's developing, and always making sure that they have access to those stories that you just rediscovered from your project. And I know for us, I kind of mentioned we have collections from throughout the state of Indiana. So we try to make sure that, if we get requests from different communities from around the state, that we try to address that and loan out artifacts. I know that there was a group here from Jeffersonville. I was just down there 2 weeks ago delivering artifacts to the Clark County Museum so they can put on a display using some of the artifacts that we have in our collection, but reflects the stories from their community. So, we always want to kind of make sure that those stories stay being told and being shared, and kind of always kind of keeping those going.
Our final question was about local communities and how they're related to your work. So thank you for answering that beautifully. Do we have any questions from students? Anything that we can ask? So do you want to maybe, Chris, do you have the mic for? Okay.
Yeah, we probably have time for just one or two questions. All right, I think I saw your hand up first. So you have to hold up.
Okay.
Let's do one
Yeah.
for team. So let's think of what's your best question for team.
What are your biggest problems and when digging up artifacts? My voice sounds so weird in this thing.
Summarize.
So biggest problems, some of the things that we heard, and maybe you can answer them, is possible destruction of the items, right? But then also with human remains, also being very careful to honor the remains that are there, the cemetery project. Oftentimes, and Jeremy, sorry, there's not just when they're recovering the cemetery, when you recover remains, there's not just a person there, but sometimes somebody's buried with things that were very important to them. And it could be jewelry, it could be all sorts of important things. And so that's also, probably a problem, is to make sure all of that stays with those remains.
Even the dirt we clean off the bones will be reburied with the individual. So it's
So even the
tracking
dirt.
all that. Yeah.
Okay.
Tracking all that and making sure it all will be reburied together. So the personal effects, the coffin hardware, of course, all the bones and teeth and the dirt.
Wow. Okay. Was there a question over here? Yeah, we had one question over here. I'm going to sneak behind you. You're going to hold both.
How do you know where to excavate the land?
Where do you start?
It somewhat depends on the site and essentially how the site was rediscovered. Once in a while, you do find artifacts on the surface that kind of give you a clue that something's there. Some of my colleagues up here kind of spoke to it before a little bit, but one of the growing methods is use of what's called geophysical investigation. So your ground penetrating radar, magnetometry, electrical resistivity, looking at different soil properties to try to see, if you're reasonably certain a site is there, with those geophysical methods that kind of look beneath the ground, can we see anything and determine maybe where it would be best to put a unit to start digging so we can see what that anomaly might be.
So how many times, even today with all this amazing technology that you just mentioned, how often is it on accident? How is it a farmer has plowed a field and realized there was a cemetery there for 100 years that they didn't know, or a construction project?
Well, yeah, we've done a couple of those, but I was actually going to ask the students in the crowd, how many of you are interested in geology? Because we work with geologists a lot so that we understand a very simple question of how old is the landform? Because if the landform is only, say, 500 years old and developed because of flooding from the river, well, we know there can't be any archaeological sites on that landform that exceed that age. So keep that in mind. But to your point, yeah. If you go to a county you've never done archaeology in before, my first suggestion to you, if there aren't good state level records, is talk to the farmers.
How about the last question for the team?
Okay, last question. All right, here we go.
I have both. Okay. So, what is something very important in archaeology that isn't commonly known?
What would surprise us?
So I have a colleague, unfortunately, he's passed several years ago, but he's very famous in underwater archaeology because he talked to groups saying, as an underwater archaeologist, dig we must. must we dig? And the idea was that we don't need to dig it up just because it's there. There has to be some reason to do it, some compelling reason, like on a shipwreck or any of these sites we're talking about. It's the science and the reason you're going there that should be the driving force, not just because we're archaeologists and digging. I can give multiple examples of historic shipwrecks we're working on or indigenous sites underwater that we just leave it alone. We may document it and leave it because there's no pressing question. Today, if you went to my booth, I had artifacts there, coins from a shipwreck that were from the trunks were brought to shore. We know from the records of a trial in 1725. We know where the shipwreck is from the magnetic signature of it underneath the sand, but there's no reason for us to dig up a 1725 shipwreck. We know about those wrecks. Instead, we got those objects that were near the beach in peril. There was a reason. So dig we must we dig is what I tell my students before we do any project.
Circle back to our very first question of the day. Why do we do it?
To sort of piggyback off that same response, I think what people don't often realize is that even if you're only looking at one site, it's incredibly rare that you excavate the entirety of that site. Usually you only excavate what you call test units, which can have slightly various sizes, but kind of the most common is 1 meter by 1 meter or 1 meter by 2 meters. And once again, when you're planning those test units or whatever your investigation entails, when you're doing that digging, the driving force is what is your research question. So even if you're looking at just one site, if you're, say, like a historic farmstead site, if your question pertains more to the sort of husbandry practices of, rural Indiana at this farmstead site, there really isn't any reason to say go dig up portions of the house. You would just focus on, the barn per se. So I think that's one thing that people often don't realize is that we actually leave quite a bit unexcavated and do that entirely on purpose.
I definitely want to give the panel a big round of applause. They really ended free, but they stayed here before to talk with us. And I also want to thank Rebecca and Gail profusely. We called them a month or so ago, 2 months ago, I think, and said, we have this crazy idea. We want to bring robots to archaeology. And it's just been so fantastic. And they're embracing this. It's been great. First Indiana Robotics, we appreciate, we've been able to reach out to several of you, we definitely want to keep those channels open so that if any of you do have any further questions or you'd like to learn more about any of the projects they're doing, we can certainly help make some connections. And also, I am sure the university folks up here would love to talk to any of you about how you can study archaeology someday. Or maybe you want to go into computer science or you want to go into whatever it is, but you can work in the field of archaeology and support the work they're doing. So,
What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, so I just want to say again, thank you. Love learning about how we use teamwork and sense skills to, connect with ideas and people in the past. So thank you again for your time. I know that all of our students are going to be at one here today, ones who will be watching the recording. We'll be so inspired to do the same and really can't wait to see it all.